think the terminology has been confused. A lot of people confuse racism with prejudice, and beyond that, they confuse prejudice with preference. Hello and welcome back to Black Statistics. My name is Sherman. In this video, I am going to share some interesting facts about a pioneering doctor in the Civil War who happened to be a black man. Now, his name was Alexander Augusta. He was born in 1825. Now, this was during slavery in the United States, but keep in mind, he was born a free man. He was born to free African Americans. Later on, he moved to Baltimore, and as a young man, he worked as a barber in an attempt to put himself through medical school. At the beginning of this journey, he applied for the University of Pennsylvania, and they refused to admit him. They cited inadequate preparation. Now, for many people, that would have been the end of it. You know, they would have accepted defeat by being denied, and they would have stopped right there. But his education continued. He was actually tutored by a professor from the same university that refused to admit him. That professor's name was Dr. William Gibson. He was a prominent professor at the university, prominent physician in the area, and he was also a white man. He saw something in young Augusta and decided to mentor him privately and give him the knowledge that he needed to be prepared to enter into a medical education. All right, so in 1847, he married a woman by the name of Mary Burgoyne. Some say that she was Native Americans, others say that she was a woman of color. It's not exactly known what her race was. Some folks say she was black. Some folks say she was a mixed. Some folks say she was Native American. I guess that's neither here nor there. They fell in love. They got married. And by 1850, they moved together to Toronto, Canada. And it was there that he was accepted into medical school. That was the Medical College and University of Toronto. Side note, something I found interesting was that along with additional preparation, he also had to leave the country to get into medical school. Again, something else that would have stopped a lot of people, but not him. He kept pressing forward. Now, after he completed his studies, he began to practice medicine in Toronto. He was appointed as a surgeon at the Toronto City Hospital. Now, this was an important phase in his career because this is what prepared him for what was to come. You see, what happened next was we had this thing in the country going on called the Civil War, the war between the North and the South. Some say the war to end slavery. Others say that it wasn't even about that. But in any case, we had a war going on, and Mr. Augusta moved back down to the U.S. from Canada. And in 1863, he was commissioned as a surgeon in the Union Army. When he was commissioned at the rank of a major, and it made him the first African American who was commissioned as a medical officer in the U.S. Army. And this is one of the things that I find kind of fascinating. Even today, people in the medical field are often commissioned at a higher rank. They don't enter the Army as a lieutenant or a captain. Often they're commissioned at a higher rank, which means that immediately when they enter service, they outrank, all the junior officers, your first and second lieutenants running around. These are the ones who went to college. They got a commission, went in the military to lead troops. A lot of these people in the medical field, they come in and they immediately outrank these guys. So what does that mean? That means that you have a black officer in the Civil War during the slavery time in the United States, when slavery was going on, outranking a multitude of white officers. Now, you can imagine that didn't go over very well. The thing I find interesting about that is, how did that happen? How was a black man able to be, one, commissioned as an officer during that time, and two, outrank white officers. Leads one to believe that things weren't exactly like we were led to believe or taught growing up. See, we were taught that everything was in black and white. At least I was taught that everything was in black and white, clear lines of division, um, and everything was a certain way for certain. But that couldn't have been the case, because if that was the case, this man would have never been commissioned, much less outranked white officers. So I think the lines couldn't have been as clear as we're often led to believe. Let me know what you think about that. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section on that. But moving along, he was not assigned to a quote unquote white unit. He was assigned to the 7th U.S. Colored Infantry Regiment. So, yes, they had colored infantry regiment. You had regular infantry or white infantry, and you had colored infantry. There was separation there, right? So obviously you had a black officer. Probably wouldn't go over well being assigned to a regular or a white unit. So he was assigned to the Colored Infantry Regiment. And his role was to provide medical care for African American soldiers. Um, and these soldiers, keep in mind, were often denied the same level of treatment or medical attention as their white counterparts. This was a brutal war, much different than what we see nowadays. I mean, if you're a child of the last 30 years or so, things look a lot different than they used to look. This was a time where, I mean, everything was, I like to use the word blunt. Um, everything was blunt. Imagine the difference between getting shot with a precision weapon versus one that shot a projectile that was literally blunt, like a ball. Now, I just use this example to try to illustrate that a little bit. Um, One, you simply get shot. The other one, you get torn apart. I mean, both hurt. Don't want either one of them. Don't want to get shot. Period. But the wounds and the damage that was caused, and the sheer scale of it back in those days was a totally different ball game than what we see nowadays. Think about this. Literally, you can have a combat action, and if 10 U.S. soldiers died, everybody in this country would be up in arms, ready to go to war, you know. But 10 soldiers dying in an action back then was nothing. Nowadays, it's more about taking out resources and equipment and stopping the fight. Then it was bodies upon bodies upon bodies stacked up. This is the same thing that goes on in a lot of the world right now. The U.S. is we're kind of sheltered from some things. But anyway, let's move forward. Later on, he was appointed to serve as to oversee the contraband hospital in Washington, D.C. This was established to care for the formerly enslaved people who fled to the Union lines. So to better understand that, I think the definition of contraband kind of points that out. Contraband, a noun, anything prohibited by law from being imported or exported. Goods, keyword goods, imported or exported illegally. Illegal or prohibited trade, smuggling. So if you call this hospital the contraband hospital, then basically it's a hospital for goods, for people who are goods. That should put a few things into perspective. But under his leadership, the hospital improved in terms of care and services for African Americans. So it was in 1865 that he was promoted to the position of the head of the Freedmen's Hospital in Washington, D.C., where he continued his work to provide medical care and training to African Americans. His contributions were significant. Also played a role in education and training of African American nurses and doctors. There's another thing I find interesting here. Education. Here's a quiz for you. Freedmen's Hospital in Washington, D.C. What HBCU or historically black college and university, since we're talking about education, is directly connected with that hospital? Let me know in the comment section below. I am not going to give the answer here, but an HBCU, historically black college university, that was directly connected to the Freedmen's Hospital in Washington, D.C., this hospital that operated during the Civil War. Again, let me know in the comment section below. And keep in mind that along with these additional duties or moving up in the world comes another promotion. This time it's the rank of lieutenant colonel. So that made him one of the highest ranking African American officers in the U.S. Army at that time. After the war, Augusta continued to advocate for racial equality in the medical field, facing ongoing discrimination, including being denied membership to the American Medical Association because of his race. Now, again, this is back in the 1800s, 1860s, right? So that would have been what, 160 years ago, maybe? 160 years ago. That's what I find so interesting when I look at some of the struggles that black folks went through. And then I look at now in current times, and there's almost this attitude that we're still going through the exact same thing in this country that we were going through then, when it is nowhere near, nowhere even close. But I digress. So nonetheless, Alexander Augusta remained active in the medical community and continued his work at the Freedmen's Hospital until his retirement. That plays into the question I asked earlier about the HBCU. Again, would love to hear the answer in the comment section if you've got it. And here's a quick story about the kind of fight that this man had, which is why I admire his story so much. He was a victim of a racial incident, and this incident ended up sparking new legislation, and it involved a streetcar. This was a horse-drawn streetcar that he was attempting to ride. Now, it was raining, and this streetcar, you could sit on the inside where you were protected from the rain, or you could ride on the outside where you get wet. He was told that because he was black, he had to ride on the outside of the streetcar. He said that he didn't want to get his uniform wet. Now, you have a black military officer in uniform who's being discriminated against, denied access to the streetcar. Eventually, he refused to relent. He was eventually pushed off of the car, and the car went on without him. What did he do? He did something that he was kind of, I won't say famous, but noted for. He used the power of the pen, and he wrote a letter, and that letter went to the Senate. The senator's name was Charles Sumner. It was forwarded to Senator Charles Sumner, who was sponsoring a law to prohibit streetcar companies in the nation's capital from segregating passengers due to race. Now, Sumner, who was a fierce and renowned abolitionist, took the story to the floor of the Senate, and this is what he noted here. An officer of the United States with the commission of major with the uniform of the United States has been pushed off one of these cars on Pennsylvania Avenue by the conductor for no other offense than that he was black. Sumner argued that this incident is worse for our country, quote, is worse for our country at this moment than a defeat in battle. So it took another year, but in March of 1865, legislation was passed that made it streetcar discrimination illegal. 1865. 1865. Again, 160 years ago. It's not like the battle for equality is just beginning to be raged in this country. And it's not like black folks have not come a long, long way in this country. In the eyes of the law, and this is what I find interesting, at least as far as I know, you can't find anything in the legal code that separates people based on the color of their skin. But you can find a lot of the opposite. Laws that have been designed to prevent the discrimination based on the color of their skin. Now you have racism. It still exists, I don't think to the extent that most people think it does, because I think the terminology has been confused. A lot of people confuse racism with prejudice, and beyond that, they confuse prejudice with preference, and racism with preference. And this is a deep rabbit hole. I'd love to have this discussion with some folks one day, just to see who's tracking, who thinks like I think, and who thinks differently. It's all good, but I think it'd make for a great conversation. Maybe I'll do a live at some point, and we could have that discussion. But I think that one of the main things to get from this story is if this man can do what he did way back then, imagine what you can do now. So on that note, be sure to like and share if you enjoyed this video. And as always, I look forward to your thoughts in the comments section below. I'll see you on the next one. Take care. Peace.
Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're giving me wings.